What's happening, everybody? Good morning. We've made it to Thursday. I'm Dan Bespris. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. We'll be talking to Karan Talwar in just a moment here on the show about the results, his team on the turn of Josh's mock draft from last week. But before we do that, there is one very large announcement that needs to happen today, and that is that mock drafts at Yahoo are officially open. It is mock draft day. Let's see what Curran thinks about that. I'm guessing he's excited as I am. Mr. Talwar, welcome to the podcast. Happy mock draft day to you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Yeah, this 60 odd days left for the season to start. When Yahoo mocks open, that's when you know that, our favorite time of the year is nearby,
It
October
is
draft
just
season.
it is here, man. And you can bet your butt that like when we finish up our recording, I'm probably gonna go record a mock draft. It's like I've just been counting down the days, man. And the thing is, before we get into your team, I figured this would be kind of an interesting topic on mock draft day, and I'll discuss it more when I'm shouting into the void during mocks later. Curran, by the way, you can follow on Twitter at KARAN underscore Talwar, TALWAR 27. And we'll fear not, mid show, I will be asking you to promo some various things. From a mock standpoint, how do you treat mock drafts in general? Because I find that sometimes we can over mock a tad, or like when you mock on just a random Yahoo one, you almost always get the guys you want. So there's sort of a lot of different ways to approach it. What's your approach to mocking?
Yeah, so for me, the way I look at it is for my home leagues, for example, or for any of the other leagues I'm in, if I know my draft position, sometimes that's sort of announced before, then it's an easy way to sort of go in and see what kind of build you can get picking out of three or four. But most of the times, or many times, people don't know where they're drafting until they enter the draft room. In which case, the mocks that some of the analysts run and some of the people who are a little bit more clued in, they run, it's I feel that's more of a time spent where I can see actual strategy, because yeah, as you said, in Yahoo mocks, half the time some people just leave in the mock and then you're just sort of sat there auto drafting. So there is value in that as well, because you understand the trends in the draft as well. For example, which we'll talk about later in ours as well, like there's a run of bigs that happens in many drafts. There's a run of guards that goes on early as well. So getting used to that, and then also just getting used to the UI and making those decisions within sort of that 1 minute 45-second period, I would still do them, and that's how I would sort of use them for actual leagues.
Yeah, there's so many interesting mock strategies. Just hammer mocking the same thing over and over again, I think, can be really misleading, because you start to think you've got the whole thing planned out, and then you get into a real draft and it doesn't go like that,
Doesn't go
and
that way.
you're just like, oh no, like I'd done this one thing 1,000 times and I knew exactly how it was going to be, and then Dunzo. But let's get into your team here. Josh's mock from last week. Don't worry, everybody. I'll be zooming in. This is just the entire board that everyone's seeing on YouTube right now. Fully not useful for anyone at the moment. By the way, forgot to mention, you can follow me on Twitter at Dan Bespers. At Old Man Squad is the network feed. It will follow you back. Please do like, rate, and subscribe, no matter how you're taking in the content these days, which I have to admit, I'm pretty freaking fired up because things have been kind of catching lately. I think it's likely because leagues are opening now, but I don't know. I wake up in a good mood these days. Zooming in a tad now for those that are watching on YouTube, you had Curran the 12th pick. You were on the turn in this mock, which is always a really interesting spot. Some years people hate it, some years people like it. How do you feel about being on the turn with the way the board is kind of shaping up this season?
Yeah, so as of this moment, I'm not the biggest fan of drafting at 11 or 12. The reason being, I think if you get number four in head-to-head leagues, you're guaranteed one of Luca or SGA, right? If you get number eight, you're guaranteed one of Davis, Antetokounmpo, Halliburton, or Tatum, right? So I feel like those two would be my favorite spots, because if you're at four, the decision's made for you. If you're at eight, the decision's sort of made for you as well, unless Embiid's there, in which case, then that's another thing. But there's the other guys available there as well. For 11 or 12, the reason I feel that it's not the best spot at the moment is there's a lot of directions you could go, right? Obviously, Trae Young went a pick earlier than mine. I would have probably taken him. You could go for the Sabonis build. You could go if you want to go really aggressive. Some people are, which I'm not the biggest fan of. You can get Anthony Edwards and Scott Barnes in the first 2 rounds of the turn. So there's just a lot of directions that you could go, and I want that decision sort of to be made for me in many times. So that's how I would look at it. And for me, I've settled obviously on Steph, and I was okay with that. I was pretty happy with that. I feel like he could have a bigger offensive load this season. And given that points, assists, threes, they tend to go off soon, assists especially in points. I wanted to get that sort of juiced up at the beginning itself.
Yeah, you went double guard at the front end with Steph and Donovan Mitchell. How does that pairing work out for what you're looking to do going forward?
Yeah, so their games in fantasy are they're not that dissimilar. So you would have those points, assists, steals as well from Donovan Mitchell and somewhat from Steph Curry as well. So it gives you a good buffer in those stats. It gives you a good buffer in free throw percentage as well, which we'll get to with the rest of the team that allowed me to make some of those picks, because if you have that sort of buffer, then you're able to not entirely punt free throws. You're still above average. And that's how I saw getting Donovan Mitchell. That to be honest with you, I know you got Lillard like 9 or 10 picks later. I was this close to just taking Lillard there. I feel like he's up there for a bounce back season as well with some of his percentages. So yeah, I wanted the two guard pairing for sure to start.
So now you've got guards, you've got, like you said, a ton of points, you've got a ton of threes, you got some decent steals, and if Steph's happened to come back a little bit, even better. Your free throws are through the roof. Assists are decent, but not massive. Steph 5 last year, Spida around 6. They each rebound actually kind of okay for small guards. Steph 4.5, Donovan Mitchell 5 on that front. And if Curry's field goal percent happens to tick back up, you also don't have to necessarily punt that despite a little bit of a guard build. The only thing you really don't have at the moment is blocks. You've also managed to build a team that's not like extraordinarily high in turnovers. I guess you're kind of mid-pack there. So you have a lot of options. So it loops back around to you at pick 36, 37. You went DeJounte Murray and then every analyst's dream right now, Jalen Williams immediately thereafter. I don't need an explanation as to why you went Jalen Williams. He's awesome. But more from a build standpoint, what were you thinking with this pair here in rounds 3 and 4?
So I wanted to shore up steals, and I wanted to get not just specialists towards the end of the draft, because it is possible steals are available easily in the ends of draft. But for me, DeJounte at this stage, like I would have wanted Cade, who went a pick earlier. I think DeJounte at this stage is probably his floor, even with Ingram being there. I'm assuming Ingram's there for the whole season and he's not moved. And if he is moved, and depending on what sort of comes back for him in return, this could be DeJounte could potentially beat this spot by a round as well. So I like him here at this spot. And Jalen Williams, while I was not taking him this early last year, just because nobody really saw. I mean, I didn't really see that large uptake in his steals staying, and his offensive load and all of that. But this year with Giddy gone, I feel there is an opportunity for him to take on a little bit more. And at this spot, I was pretty happy with him. I did look at Mobley as well, to get that big man in early. But that's how I looked at these two to sort of get those steals, assists out of position, points are decent as well at this point.
So just a quick look at your team. It feels like maybe there's a bit of a weakness in rebounding now, because you're basically 4, not necessarily guards, I guess. Jalen Williams more of a wing, but you're 4 picks in, you do not have a big man. So you kind of have to reconcile a little bit of that, like, okay, I'm weak in big man stats, but also I don't have a big man. So how do you process that as you're moving through? Because there's a difference between being weak at big man stats and also having big men on your team, as opposed to being weak in big man stats, but not actually having one yet. So how do you figure out how weak a certain category is at that juncture? It's a little bit convoluted question, but hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, so you alluded to this earlier, right? Donovan Mitchell and Steph Curry are decent rebounders for their position, right? So, they're not like the 2.6 or 2.7 rebound kind of guards which are there, right? And even with Jalen Williams, you get a decent amount of rebounds, but obviously I'm not gonna be competing with some of the teams which have drafted big men in the earlier rounds. So for me, then the next picks, I wanted to try to shore up rebounding as much as I could. And then in my mind at this time, there was also the late rounds that there was big men coming. And that's how I was sort of looking at getting those points up first and then going back towards rebounds in the middle and late rounds.
And we can see that play out here. I was wondering if you were going to segue it. I'll segue it for you. Zion at 60, Nick Claxton at 61. You went pretty hard into bigger dudes here. Zion, not a traditional big man, more scoring, more assisting. Obviously, does have that weakness on the free throw side, as does Nick Claxton. You've now turned your team into a pretty well-rounded club because you took your free throw advantage, you kind of brought that back to earth. You took the weaknesses and you brought those back up towards a floor. At this point, at least in my eyes, it doesn't look like you're specifically trying to punt anything. It looks like you're building a pretty 9-category focused ball club. Am I off or on base here?
You're on base, right? And I know punting is a strategy that works a lot in head to head, right? And it is something I've done in the past as well. But a lot of the leagues that I've been in and I've done well in, I've also employed a strategy which is not punting anything, right? It just means that you have to fill in your team essentially with a lot of point guards and a lot of centers because you want point guards who are not that bad at FG. You want centers who are not horribly bad at free throw, right? And then you're sort of balancing that out. Now, Claxton's free throws are not great, right? Zion's not a big man, but his free throws are not great. But if you have those sort of buffers in the free throws that I got earlier, and then what I'm going to get later on in this draft as well, you can sort of make that happen. For me, Claxton, the way I looked at him, he's an easy sort of double person. Get you close to 2 blocks, maybe more than 2 blocks a game. The one worry I have with Claxton here is that Brooklyn's a bad team. They are really, I mean, there's no prizes for guessing. So is it a situation wherein we go into March, we go into playoff season, and he's just not playing? They've given the reins over to Clowney or they're trying out Daron Sharp. So that's a consideration I have. And I have that with some other teams as well. Obviously, Brooklyn being the one which is the most, but I have that concern with, for example, Utah as well. A little bit like what they do with Markkanen towards the end of the season. He's got his contract now, even though they're obviously not as bad as Brooklyn. But that's how I looked at Claxton. With Zion, I feel like he still has a level to go from here as well in terms of his scoring. It is a possibility it goes up as well. Obviously, his injury risk and everything that's well documented. But I feel at this spot to get him, I was okay with that.
Did you give any thought here? And I'm not trying to play devil's advocate. I'm really just trying to dig a little deeper on how the strategy played out in your mind. Did you give any thought here to saying, you know what, I have this team where I still think I can be pretty darn good in both percentages, but if I'm going to do that, then I probably have to sacrifice, one of or maybe two of the more traditional big man categories. Like, do I sacrifice rebounds? Do I sacrifice blocks or something like that? Did you think about maybe going with big dudes who perhaps block less but free throw better at this point? And if so, how did you end up deciding to go one direction versus the other?
Yeah, that's good, right? So for me, it was just about blocks. At this point in the draft, all those big men, the big blockers, many of them hadn't gone yet. So I felt in the later rounds I could get that position, get that stat back. So that's wherein sort of leaned into that Claxton mode, right? I did consider Vooch as well, obviously a quote unquote boring pick, but for me it was I can still sort of salvage those blocks and then sort of get that towards the end of the draft as well. So that's how I chose Claxton there.
I'm going to zoom out for the YouTubers so you can see some of the other players that were going either right before in the 5th round or right after in the 6th, things that were, because everybody's like, oh, why didn't you go this guy? It's like, well, he went off, 12 picks before that. So obviously I couldn't go that direction. Let's do the next couple before we take a brief pause. Jordan Poole was your end of the 7th round pick. Tyler Hero started your 8th round pick. This is a low floor, high ceiling pair. I'm more excited about Poole this year than I am about Tyler Hero, but that's just me. What was the thought process here? Because now you've gone and you've kind of drafted. I mean, I guess DeJounte Murray is sort of a shooting guard, but these are really kind of the first traditional shooting guards you've put on your team so far.
Yeah, so fun fact, I actually timed out on the hero pick. I actually wanted Cam Thomas, and I heard Kingy on the pod, and that's a good pick. But hero was just right next to him on my queue. So I'll talk through it, right? For Jordan Poole, obviously where he was going last year, that didn't work out for anyone, right? But I feel like where he's going this year, there's a decent chance he returns value here, right? I know Brogdon's there. I know Bob Carrington's there, and we don't know what's going to happen with Brogdon. But even if Poole sort of starts at the 1 or the 2, and if they push back sort of Kuzma to the 3, and then with Sarr at 4, um, he'd be a good source of points, assists, free throw percentage, right? That covers off some of the free throw issues that Claxton and Williamson have earlier in my team. So I feel here is a good spot for him for me. And then with Tyler Hero, yes, he's sort of that boring 18, 19 points, 4 or 5 rebounds, assists around there as well. Not much upside from that. I don't see his defensive stats ever sort of coming in. But at this point, he's a solid floor pick, which gives you a scoring boost, which is, hard to find in the draft at this point.
Since you kind of wanted Cam Thomas, maybe I just ask you about him. What's your view on Cam? I'm weirdly positive on him, even though it's the type of player I don't usually look at. Not, me, the 9-cat roto, sometimes punting points guy, but I actually think that there's a chance he could have a really interesting season.
Yeah, my rationale for that is who else in Brooklyn? Like,
Yeah.
who else is taking any shot in that team, right? If you just look at their starting 5, or what could be projected starting 5, and I think, everyone talks about his scoring boost, which is there, right? But even if he just sort of ups his assists and rebounds by a little bit, right? You go from whatever, like 2.9 and 3.1, what it was last year, to even just 0.6, 0.7 more. That's going to make him bump up in rankings all over, right? So I feel there's opportunity there for growth in terms of those ancillary stats, which make him a really, really good pick at this sort of juncture of the draft.
Before we get to your picks that I would qualify as kind of the late flyer types, or late slash flyer, because you're at the end here of the 9th round. That's pick 108 and later. Let's do a quick promo. Again, talking to Karan Talwar, KARAN_TALWAR27 on social. Where can folks find your stuff, and what are you working on these days?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter on what's on the screen, Karan_Talwar27. I got my own newsletter going, and on my site, Swishscribe, in which I'm writing about fantasy. Recently did a piece on handcuffing, which was interesting. Did a piece on late round flyers from each of the 30 teams. I got more content coming for second year players, third year players, potentially on breakout watch. I'm going to do some punt stuff as well. I'm going to talk about what we were alluding to, what we were talking about earlier, which is about building a balanced squad and head-to-head and what that looks like. So there's content coming there. So, just ramping up in time for our favorite time of the year for October. So,
yeah, it's a good time. It's a good time indeed. Your next few picks are, some are like, I don't want to say, I want to say all over the map, but I mean it in a nice way. They're just like every different type of play you could have gone here over your next 6 rounds. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on them. End of the 9th round, you went Alex Sarr, and the start of the 10th, you went injured Kristaps Porzingis. Please talk to me about those two guys. Sarr, the rookie coming in, like, what's the role going to look like? And then with Porzingis, how long can you, or do you feel comfortable sitting on a player at the start of the year?
Yeah, to be honest, okay, so I'll talk through Porzingis first, right? Sometimes in these mocks, right, earlier on, I like to do sort of temperature checks to see where players are going to go, try to see if I can sort of get them at value, right? So the reason I took Porzingis here was in the leagues that I was in, the draft only leagues that B-Dub runs. I think he's done about 40 of those already, and the ADP data on that has Porzingis going in the 60s, right? And this is with a lot of sort of long-time FBI members who are part of those leagues. So I'm still not sure. I'm still not happy about this pick at where I picked Porzingis. If I could go back in time, obviously Okongwu going there put a spanner in my works, and that was made me into a little bit of a panic mode. But if I had to go back, potentially Mitch Robb was available, Trace Jackson Davis was available. I could have gone in that direction. But it was more just to see like how it would be received by everyone who knows what they're doing in this draft, all the other analysts, and see like, can we get a temperature check on where Porzingis should go? And I think we called the temperature check that he should not potentially go this early, maybe last round, maybe second last round. That's how I looked at Porzingis. For Sarr, it was more of a fun pick for me at this time as well. I know he's got a lot of flack for his 0-15 shooting in summer league. I feel like he's going to have all the opportunity in Washington. He's going to start at the 4 potentially, even if he comes off the bench. Give me 6 or 7 rebounds, maybe 1.5 blocks plus. That's a standard league player there. And it was a little bit of panic because there's not many bigs available. There was about like 8 big men that went in the last 15 picks from where I picked. So it was a little bit of that as well, but that's how I ended up with Sar there and Porzingis, and looking forward then.
You got another rookie at the end of the 11th in Zach Edey and a sophomore, right? Yeah, sophomore in the start of the 12th in Taylor Hendricks. Other than Porzingis here, you're leaning very young. Is this a play towards the midway point and farther in a head-to-head season, or were these? And Josh talks about this sometimes. Sometimes he says he likes to just throw a guy in a mock draft because he wants to be able to talk about them when he's doing podcasts and things like that. So, what do you think Edey does this year more than anything? And then the growth of Hendricks. What does that curve look like to you?
Yeah, for me, the last 3 or 4 picks in the standard 14 roster size draft are flyers. Like, I want to get guys here who potentially beat this by 20 spots, or if they don't, then I just flush them out, in the weeks and in the months and on the wire, and then pick up hot agents or free agents there. So for Edey, I feel he's the probable starter at the moment in Memphis with 25 minutes, 24 minutes, even if you want to be sort of looking at it from a generous perspective. And he could average up 1.5 blocks, maybe 7 or 8 rebounds, 10, 12 points there with some upside there, right? And big men in rookies are the ones which return the most value in standard leagues, more so than point guards. Point guards pick it up later on, like how we've seen that. But that's where I saw Edey's value here. Hendricks, just because Utah is not going to be in a position where they don't have all the opportunity for him. They're going to give him the minutes that he needs at this point at the 4. He has a good fantasy skill set, with some threes there, some rebounds, some blocks as well. And I feel like at this point, it's worth a crack with getting him here.
End of the 13th, Ben Simmons. Is this a play on maybe he just is upright at the start of the season, or are you actually excited about him in any way?
I've been excited about him for the last 3 years. I've been taking him in drafts every year. I've been falling for it, like getting him after his off-season workout videos or his preseason, the 2 games that he does well in. And I wish I could tell you it's more than that, but it's not really. It's just, I just want him to hit once and then, potentially give me, even if he gives me 12, 6 and 6 for 50 games, he returns this, but beats this by 40 spots.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. And, this is so freaking late in the draft that, like you said, if it doesn't work, you flush it out. Because the other guy's going right now, like most of the dudes on the board, some of them aren't even on a team yet. Many of them are set to play like every other day. So I get it. Like, he might just be dead. But if he's not, then why the hell not? And then Noah Clowney was your last round pick in this one. And he's become a little bit of an analyst darling, folks that have talked about him on the show. I'm trying to think of the right way to frame this one. What is the upside with Clowney? What's a good case scenario for him?
I don't know if he starts. I think there's probably next to zero chance of him being the starter on opening night. For me, it's a couple of reasons I took him. One, yeah, it's a fun sort of pick to have at this point. He also has a good skill set, some rebounds, blocks, maybe some threes as well coming in from the big man spot. Doesn't kill your free throws theoretically. And more also like as a handcuff almost to Nick Claxton, because if Claxton does get shut down in March, right, chances are like Clowney would be in for a bigger role. Obviously, even Daron Sharp, but chances are Clowney gets a bigger crack then as well. So it's more of a fun pick. And then I saw there was a couple of other players that went after who I also would have considered. I think Jonathan Isaac went there. I would have considered him. Vince Williams, Andre Drummond as well for those reasons. So yeah, I mean, it's more of a getting that in right now and see if you flush him out later.
Looking back at your team altogether, talking to Karan Talwar here on the show, what did you, and again, this pretty open-ended question. I'll try to zoom out a little bit for the YouTubers. I don't know how blurred that's going to get on the screen, so I'll probably zoom back in a moment. I'll quickly read off your team here, 14 picks, but then I'm going to ask you what you liked, what you didn't like, and kind of what you do the same or different going forward. At the turn, again, the team, Steph Curry, Donovan Mitchell, DeJounte Murray, and Jalen Williams, the top four. Zion, Nick Claxton, Jordan Poole, and Tyler Hero gets us through the 8th round. Alex Sarr, Kristaps Porzingis, 9 and 10. Zach Edey, Taylor Hendricks, 11 and 12, and then Ben Simmons and Noah Clowney, the last two, kind of the true ultra deep, maybe something will work type of spot in an analyst 14 round deal. So, what did you end up liking? What would you take back? I know you said you auto drafted Hero, so Cam Thomas would have been the choice there in a different universe. But like from a build standpoint, do you have any regrets? What's your feel overall at the end of this one?
Yeah, so for me, I think the Sarr and KP picks I would really look at. Maybe I would take Sarr and then maybe one of Mitch Robinson or Trace Jackson Davis, as I was talking about earlier, and maybe let Prison just slide a lot more. Right? That's what I would do because most of these leagues do have IR, so you could pop him there, and then you could look at what you do with that position. So that's one I would potentially take back. I think what I did like was the start to the draft in terms of the first 4 picks. Those kind of fit in really well. And then also like the Poole Hero Cam Thomas trio, getting 2 of those. That's to get those free throws going as well with Zion and Nick Claxton there. I think that's a part I like. The Flyers are the Flyers.
You've given yourself an avenue mid-season because you really like if you decide partway through the year, let's say, for example, let's say Edey and Sarr don't pan out. So hypothetically, let's say Edey doesn't play enough. Let's say Sarr doesn't really get any opportunity until like February or something like that. I don't think that that's necessarily going to happen, particularly with Sarr. He's going to do something. But hypothetically, you've given yourself an out to potentially say, you know what, screw it on a couple of the big man stats and maybe move like a Nick Claxton and give yourself that big free throw bump to kind of lean back in the other direction. Is that something you've ever done on the head-to-head side with a team like this before, or was that just something that kind of happened as you were going?
Yeah, you got to be nimble, right? So when the season starts, and if you see that even though you thought you drafted for blocks or you thought you drafted for rebounds, but you're not sort of getting that success, you got to be able to move off that, right? You got to be able to then find those 5 or 6 categories that you are strong in, and then fortify them. So always be willing to, like this was my original plan, but it didn't work out. Be open to, changing it up because that's how you're going to win those leagues. Because if you just stick with that same thing, then you're going to end up in the playoffs and those weaknesses will show up again.
Curran, you're officially off the hot seat. What time is it in the UK right now?
5 p.m.
Oh, that's not that bad. That's not as big a gap as I'm used to trying to figure out like what time is it in Western Australia right now? Yeah, London's not that far. So I guess I'll say to you then, enjoy dinner or is that that lingo's probably screwed up there. Enjoy the evening. Can I go with that and not screw up the lingo?
Yes, that works just fine. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Curran, you're the man, dude. Everybody follow Curran on Twitter at KARAN_TALWAR27. Drafting on the turn. That was the strategy today. Let's do it again soon, yeah?
Of course.
And so that's the turn. That's drafting on the turn. And Curran's right. Like, the turn gets screwy. I'm a little bit, so I'll say this. I actually don't mind the turn this year. The points that Curran made about like having the decision made for you is from a human standpoint a really good and insightful note because and this is about all things humans do in life. I'm thinking about myself when people talk about like having a decision made for you. I think about the fact that because most of you that have watched or listened to my shows over the years, you guys know I worked as and still continue to do work as a play-by-play broadcaster. Now it's more, hobby-ish, but for a long time that was my career. For 6 seasons, I was up in Bakersfield with the Blaze before that team folded, and that team folded and moved to the Carolina League. Like literally, my wife was 7.5 months pregnant with our first child when the Bakersfield Blaze moved away. And I bring that up because my wife works as a physician in Los Angeles. And so I lived in LA in the off season. I lived in Bakersfield during the baseball season. And in this moment, it was like, Dan, here's a bunch of choices life is making for you. You got no baseball team anymore. You're having a kid. You're moving back to LA full time. Figure it out. And there's a certain comfort that's just like, I didn't have to rip off that Band-Aid myself. I didn't have to do it. The world did it for me. And that's a bigger one, obviously, than deciding who you want to take at pick 8 in a redraft league. But it's that same phenomenon where, like, having to do it yourself, then you can be mad at yourself if something goes wrong. When the world does it for you, if something doesn't work or doesn't, whatever, you just blame the world. It's much easier that way. And so to that end, what Curran was talking about is really accurate. When you get to pick 4, you're going to take Shea, even if there might be, even if Anthony Davis and Joel Embiid and frankly even Kawhi Leonard, maybe those guys are better per game this year than Shea. It's possible. The injury risk is so much higher on all of those players I just named. So you're going to take him there. And now AD and Giannis are basically going the next 2. Sometimes Halliburton. Okay, great. You kind of have your choices made for you. Yeah, the board gets screwy after about pick 8. 8 through like 13, 14 are all almost completely interchangeable. Sometimes you go Trae Young, you go the guard build. Sometimes you go Embiid and roll the dice. Sometimes you go Kevin Durant and go the well-rounded build. Sometimes, as Curran went here, you go the guard build, but you do it without the assist starting point, because Trae Young and Tyrese Halliburton were both off the board already. I'm inclined to agree, by the way. In the players that were left on the board for Curran at this point, I don't think you could do a whole lot better than Steph Curry and Donovan Mitchell. The only fear there is, can Donovan Mitchell play 60 ball games this year? Can he get to 60, 65? Or do you lean another way? Do you go Steph Curry and Domantas Sabonis, and that's an extraordinarily well-rounded team that can't block shots? Maybe that's the play. Maybe you punt blocks with a high-scoring guard, a lower-scoring big man who passes, but you're good at everything, not great at many things, and you're only bad at one. Or do you go Donovan Mitchell and you become great at 3 things, but pretty weak in a few others? Or do you go Devin Booker and now you're suddenly good at both percentages again, but you have that same sort of guard, off guard starting point, and it opens up different avenues. I think pairing Domantas Sabonis is probably the easiest path from this point with a guard in the first round. And then you're probably, you can shore up blocks later on if you need to, but if you didn't want to, you could go that way. So there's sort of like the roto versus head-to-head discussion. Or do you try to go real hard on guards? And Curran was talking about how De'Aaron Fox, Cade Cunningham, they came off the board right before his 3rd round pick. So that made life a little bit more complicated. 4th round, he went Jalen Williams for efficiency and steals and stuff like that. But you could also go, Mobley was a big he mentioned. If you go deeper into that round, Jalen Johnson is super intriguing there. Jimmy Butler went very late in this draft, right? 11th pick of the 4th round. So there's all these avenues you could travel down. Do you want to punt this? Do you want to shore up this? You guys know me. Historically, I'm going to try to be decent at as many categories as humanly possible and then kind of see what the board offers me. But it is one of the hard things about being on the back end turn. You're locked in a little bit after your first 2 picks because you're not getting another one until 36. By the way, it's why leagues need 3rd round reversal. Like, life would be very different for Curran's team if his 3rd round choice still could have included guys like Van Vliet, Paul George, Jalen Brunson, Markkanen. Maybe Dame makes it to him there as opposed to DeJounte Murray. But anyway, all things we will cover over the great entirety that is fantasy draft season. Coming up on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. First of all, again, quick reminder to follow Curran on the socials, KARAN_TALWAR27. The newsletter that he mentioned is Swish Scribe. That's a Beehive newsletter, swishscribe.beehive.com. It's BEEHIIV.com. You can check out Curran's awesome work over there. I don't think he gave the spelling on that, but that's where you can find his written content. So check him out. At Dan Vespers, at Old Man Squad. Like, rate, and subscribe. Please continue to do that. Get us into those damn recommended feeds. That's how we're going to continue to grow this monster. Particularly those listening on Apple right now. I need you guys to keep dropping those 5-star reviews as well. The rest of this week doesn't have a whole lot left, by the way, other than, mocks being open. So that's freaking awesome. There still has not, believe it or not, been a Yahoo board readjustment, so we don't have that to talk about. So this is what's floating around right now. Later on today, we're going to do at least one, maybe as many as 2 live mock episodes here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. It's sort of like a mocks are open big celebration type of day. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking to Dan Palio in the morning. In the afternoon, if the Yahoo board is still the same tomorrow afternoon, we're going to do the After 100 episode, which is effectively the sleepers. Some of them are not sleepers. The guys that are being drafted right after 100 are still pretty well-known names. Once you get past about 120, then you get into more clunky players. Then you get into really more, like 10 to 15 names that I would consider from that point on. But we'll get through all of them because, like, Jakob Poeltl at 108, not a sleeper. Everybody knows frickin' Jakob Poeltl. But he's after 100 right now and definitely belongs on frickin' fantasy teams. So anyway, that's tomorrow. Today, it's mock time, baby. Let's get mock crazy. This was technically a mock recap show, but what we haven't done yet is a live show. No, live mock show. I don't think I'm going to do the show live because if 3 or 4 people drop out of the mock, I'd rather just abandon ship and do a new one. And I don't want that. I don't have to delete that show. You guys sat through it. That's annoying. It'll likely be recorded, but I'm going to record me doing the mock draft in real time and, ranting and raving about nonsense while it happens. So that should be a lot of fun. Meantime, I'll see you guys on social at Dan Vespers, again, at Old Man Squad. We'll follow you back. Thanks to Curran. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball on the OMS Network. Awesome. Oh, we had a show launch yesterday. I hope you guys were able to check it out. It's on our YouTube page. It's called Between Two Dans. Adam King hosting a show where he is joined by people named Dan to talk about fantasy basketball. So make sure to check that out. And until a couple hours from now, we'll see you guys for the first of a few mocks later on today. I'm Dan. So long.